Review and recap series for Making of America 1789 to 1900. Today we're going to look at the second section within the second topic of Making of America, which was the West 1839 to 1860. In the last video we looked at what the West was like with the plains, with main tribes such as the Lakota Sioux and what their culture was like. We also looked at the journey west and the difficulties such as crossing the Rocky Mountains. And we also looked at the reasons for why people moved west, with reasons like Manifest Destiny and the banks collapsing in 1837 as just a couple of examples. What we're going to look at in this particular video is the different types of people that moved west, and again, their reasons for doing this. We're going to start off with a group called the Mormons. You may have heard of the Mormons before. They are a Christian denomination, and we're going to have a look at this group and why they felt the need to move west. So first of all, they were established in the early 19th century, okay, so the 1800s. They became popular in the US in the 1830s. So it'd be worth trying to remember this group are Christian, and obviously the name, the Mormons, you need to know. The Mormons wanted to practice their religion freely and without persecution. So persecution is treating someone in a negative way as a result of something like their religion, their race, etc. So these people faced persecution because people saw their religion as quite unusual. One of the reasons for this is because of their belief in polygamy. So polygamy is a practice where men can have numerous wives. The reason being so that they can have lots and lots of children. So you need to know the term polygamy, you need to know how to spell this, and you need to know that it was a key belief that was frowned upon by the majority of the United States. The leader of the Mormons was a man called Brigham Young. He chose Utah as a place to build a Mormon settlement, which he called Salt Lake City. Okay, so you need to know Salt Lake City, hence it being in bold, was the main place for the settlement of the Mormons in the West. The Mormon Church decided how much land each family got. Nobody was allowed to own their own water, and farming was the main job for the Mormons. So it was almost set up like a communist ideology in the terms of you get what you need, not what you want. So the church decided what size house you need, what size land you need. It isn't down to the individual, it's owned collectively. The main place of worship was a Mormon temple, and this was built in the centre of Salt Lake City. Again, try and remember that name. Brigham Young wanted Utah to become a state. So remember, to become a state, you need lots of white Americans to move to an area. The US government won't recognise this. There's not enough people there, so they decide that it should be recognised just as a territory. However, the number of Mormons began to grow rapidly between 1850 and 1860. Now, this is unsurprising when we know that they believed in polygamy. Remember, the practice of having multiple wives and producing more and more children. So the number of people within this area in Utah and Salt Lake City began to increase. In 1857, a group of Mormons massacred some settlers they believed to be US spies. So this religious group act in a very violent way, and up until this point they'd been rather peaceful. So as much as they had this unusual belief of polygamy, the US government tended to leave them alone. However, this scandal forced Young to step down as the governor of Utah, and Utah had to follow the same rules as the rest of the US, including rules on marriage. So in terms of why the Mormons moved west then, they were trying to escape persecution because people thought that their practice of polygamy was unusual, and also because they were out the way, their practice of polygamy pretty much went unchallenged until in 1857 the Mormons react violently to this group that they perceived to be spies. So the Mormons are a group that moved west, and we've just spoken about the reasons why they did this. This would be a good group of people to learn as an example of migration west for the exam. Okay, the second group we're going to have a look at are the people that fled west during the Californian gold rush. We're going to have a look at two gold rushes. This is the first one. You do need to know the years for this, so 1848 to 1849. Some key names here and some key information in bold again on your screen for you. So first of all, the person that discovered gold was somebody called James Marshall, and he found gold in California at John Sutter's mill. So this man found the gold, he told his boss, but they kept this a secret because they were nervous about people flooding into the area and trying to take all the gold, which is exactly what ends up happening. This was because a man called Sam Brannan, who again would be good to reference in the exam, specific information for 7, 8 and 9, Sam Brannan goes shouting through the streets about the discovery of gold. So he really spreads the word. And this is enhanced further by the fact that President Polk confirms that gold has been found. So it's not just one man shouting through the streets, although that's how it starts off. The president reinforces this message by confirming that there has been gold found there. And this leads to lots of people rushing to the area. There were stories circulating of men making $1,000 a day, and over 50,000 Americans headed to California in 1849 alone. So it's very, very likely that this area is going to become a state because of how many people are rushing there, and they are after gold. The people who actually made the most money weren't the people that were digging for gold. They were the opportunists who sold equipment. So you will have heard of Levi jeans, I'm sure. So Levi sold these hard-wearing denim jeans to the people that were digging for gold, and he made a lot of money from them. Also, people who were selling axes, pans, tents, they were the men who made all the money, not the people that were digging for gold. Okay, so as mentioned, because so many people headed west, California became a free state in 1850. Remember, by free state, we mean that it was an area that did not allow slavery. It was a northern state on the west coast. As so many Americans had flocked there, this gave them the right to become a state. And lots of people had more political power as a result of this. Impact 2 is quite negative. And it involves the natives. So natives were shot by gold miners such as the 49ers. Violence was actually encouraged by the Californian government. They didn't want the natives in the way of people coming to try and dig gold, because remember, the more people that came to California, the more money that was spent. It was better for the economy. They gained more political power. So they want the natives out of the way. In the 1850s, a law was passed that said any native who couldn't prove he had a job could be sold to white settlers as slave labour. So we can clearly see here that the natives were seen as an inferior group of people, and the impact of the Californian gold rush on their way of life was extremely negative. Finally, there is an environmental impact of the Californian gold rush. There was a lot of damage. So to extract the gold, there were high-powered water jets used to release quartz from the mountains. And this caused many, many problems, starting with the fact that hillsides were eaten away by the process and rivers were clogged with dirt and gravel. So in terms of environmental impact, extremely negative. We also have flooding, which became a problem, and the chemicals used to extract the gold also killed fish and wildlife. So if you were asked about the Californian gold rush in the exam, it would be good to know the impacts that I've given you on the board. The more specific, the better. So knowing, for example, that the natives were shot by the 49ers, knowing the environmental damaging, being able to give an example, such as killing fish and wildlife due to the chemicals, and knowing what year California became a state. These are all specifics that would look very good in the exam. If you were asked on a gold rush, the likelihood is you might be asked to compare. So we have the Californian gold rush in 1848 to 1849, and then we have a gold rush called Pike's Peak. There are two main differences, which I'll go through with you in a moment, but you do need to know the difference generally between the two, so please revise both of them. Firstly, news spread in the east. So remember, we're thinking about the west, but the news was spreading in the east of America of gold being found in the Kansas territory. This was happening through newspapers. So if we're thinking about differences, remember with the Californian gold rush, it was spread through the news of Sam Brannan shouting through the streets and President Polk confirming the news. With Pike's Peak, this is different. The newspapers are spreading the news. The recession, so an economic downturn, banks collapsing, again, people losing their money, very similar to what happened in the 1830s, as we spoke about on the last video. So the recession in 1857 had also helped encourage over 100,000 people to make the journey to Pikes Peak, so even more than the amount of people that migrated to California when the news started to spread about the gold there. Okay, so we've got two main differences from the Californian gold rush. Firstly, we have rail lines. These help people travel from east to west. The landscape was easier to cross than the mountains to California, so twice the number of people travelled there. We spoke about the dangers on the journey west on the previous video, so you should know that rail lines would be a massive help and also increase confidence to travel west. We also have town boosters. These were people who exaggerated the ease of getting to the gold, making it sound as though their town was the place to stay. So people would suggest that the gold was much nearer to their area, in the hope that many people would move there, spend money, help the economy, and also perhaps buy products from their opportunists. Remember, we said the men selling axes, selling spades, etc. So these town boosters exaggerated and encouraged people to move to towns where actually they were not very close to the gold and very unlikely to make much money. Okay, the impacts then. Similar to California, Kansas becomes a state in 1861. This is a result of so many white Americans flocking there. It was now a place to stay, to locate. It was not just to pass through. So Kansas, the same as California, becomes a state as a result of so many people moving there. So again, if you were comparing, this is clearly a similarity. California becoming a state in 1850, Kansas becoming a state in 1861. Impact 2, natives lost out to white settlers. So again, not the violence that we had with the Californian gold rush, but natives losing out, natives being treated negatively. That is a similarity between the two. White settlers wanted to settle on the plains in areas which belonged traditionally to the Arapaho and the Cheyenne, and this forced natives further from their land to hunt and caused tension and anger. We already know that so many of the natives had been displaced. If we go right back during the Indian Removal Act, and then if we go back again to the 1840s and 1850s, where they were moving to the plains and displacing natives, we now have these two gold rushes, and once again the natives are in the way of white settlers, and therefore they are treated extremely badly. Impact 3, the US government were becoming convinced that the natives would simply give in and hand their lands to the US. Actually, the resentment now from the natives was vastly increasing. There was lots of anger, and it becomes increasingly likely that war will break out between the natives and the white settlers and the US government as a result. So they are the two gold rushes. We also have the Mormons as well. You need to know about these different groups of people that migrated west during this period. Remember, the topic dates are 1839 to 1860 for the West. So you need to know the different groups of people that moved there and why they did this. And for the two gold rushes, you need to know the similarities and the differences as we've been through. Okay then, so to test your knowledge on the second part of this section on the West, I would like you to pause the video in a moment, write down the answers to the 6 questions that you can see, and then restart the video and I will run through the answers with you. Okay, number 1, what is polygamy and which Christian group followed this practice? So the answer is having multiple wives. We spoke about Brigham Young, the leader of the Mormons. He actually had 55 wives, and it's the Mormons who are the group that follow this practice of polygamy, which, remember, is something that is not accepted by the rest of the US. Number 2, how many Americans headed west to California after President Polk confirmed gold had been found, and what happened to California as a result in 1850? So it was 50,000 Americans that fled there, and California becomes a state as a result. Number 3, name an environmental consequence of the California gold rush. Hillsides were eaten away by the process of using high-powered water jets, which were used to release quartz from the mountains. Rivers were clogged with dirt and gravel. Flooding also became a problem, and chemicals used to extract gold also killed fish and wildlife. So any of those, I only wanted one from you. Number 4, how did news spread of gold being found in the California gold rush compared to Pike's Peak? So remember, in California, we had Sam Brannan shouting through the streets, and we also had President Polk, who confirmed the news that the gold had been found. In the Pike's Peak gold rush, we had the newspapers that confirmed that gold had been discovered. Number 5, name the 2 main differences between the Californian and Pike's Peak gold rushes. Remember, we have the rail lines, which made it easier to travel from east to west, which we didn't have with the California gold rush due to the mountains. And we had the town boosters. Remember, these people who exaggerated the likelihood of finding gold and the ease of finding gold near to their town. Finally, number 6, name 2 consequences of Pike's Peak. Kansas becoming a state in 1861. Again, a similarity to the Californian gold rush, where California became a state in 1850. Natives lost out to white settlers, and war became much more likely between the natives, the white settlers, and the US government. Okay, so that is the second topic of Making of America completed, which was the West 1839 to 1860. In the next video, we're going to have a look at Civil War and Reconstruction 1861 to 1877.